And you are very welcome along to this week's edition of the Snap. American Football and Off the Ball is brought to you in association with the Aer Lingus College Football Classic, Navy versus Notre Dame at the Aviva Stadium on August 29th. Check out collegefootballireland.com for game tickets and more. As ever, we've got Cian Fahey and Ronan Mullen with us from their respective bunkers. Gentlemen, you're both very welcome this afternoon. Cian, I presume your draft prep is finished at this point. You know, you're, as a noted draftnik, all your work is done. You can just sit back and relax and let the rumours wash over you for the final few days.
No, not really. I don't like. People have in the NFL world have a tendency to rush to get everything done in time for the actual draft. But unless I'm specifically covering the draft that year, I tend not to, because I'd rather spend my time, because there's 6 months here of an off season to work with. I'd rather spend as much time as possible. So I actually only cover the top 20 or top 30 to 40 prospects initially, and then once players actually get drafted to specific spots, you find guys who are worth watching, because you can't watch all 250. So I'm actually like, I'm enough for covering the first round, which is the important thing at this stage, but it's still a lot of work to do. It is there. I mean, it is. I was kind of joking, to be honest. I don't expect anybody at this stage, apart from the people whose job. A lot of people do. The ones whose job it is to scout college football as well, because like, really, you can't actually know how well somebody's going to do until they've been through the preseason, which this year there's not going to be one, and then have played a few games, so you can actually see whether or not they are adapting to the challenges of the NFL. Hell, even then, like we talked about Brashad Perriman last week, he failed for 3 years, and then he finally found his right fit in Cleveland, and then showed his consistency and became a better player, even better player in Tampa. Like, Bill Belichick has the right idea with this. He doesn't care about getting the top picks. Well, obviously he cares. He would rather have top picks. But his preference is to stockpile draft picks and get as many as possible, because he knows this hit rate is 50-50. He knows this is a lottery. So it's a great thing for getting everyone very excited. It's a great thing for talking every player up. Like, Joe Burrow has become the greatest quarterback in the NFL already without taking a step in the NFL, even though he's got to compete with the likes of Patrick Mahomes and Lamar Jackson. So it's very unlikely that he'll be anything more than an above average quarterback. But we have to hype up this thing every year. We have to get excited. But it is a very fun thing to do. It is. And actually, it is kind of exciting. Certainly when there's nothing else happening in the world right now, apart from the draft. I was a little bit kind of 10 days ago, I was like, when is the draft even? And then I started to go, hang on a second, this could be quite interesting. And even all the crap around how they're going to do it, the fears about the various Zoom calls being hacked. I'm waiting with bated breath to see which of the teams' inferior security infrastructure is the one that ends up getting hacked. My money's on the Bengals, but let's wait and see. Ronan, as a Ravens fan with a very well-stocked team at the moment, what do you want your team to do in the draft this week?
Well, in all the mocks, I see Patrick Queen seems to be the guy that they're being linked with a lot, and I'm not sure he's actually going to be there by the time the Ravens come around, because as much as Burrow got all the credit coming out of college, on that team, Queen was definitely the defensive MVP. He was just a lights-out, three-down player, so I think he could possibly fill the void that CJ Mosley left behind. And then obviously Marshall Yond is a huge loss for the Ravens, given that they're a run-first team now, and that's a gaping hole in the middle. So I think they're going to have to try and address that as well. So another wide receiver, a big body. Like, I love Marquise Brown, but I think they need a big body target for Lamar in games like where they came unstuck last year, where he probably just needs to throw the ball up there and hope somebody can make a play. Precision can go out the window in the playoffs, as we know. So I think he could probably do it a few more assets like that. And
how many picks are they, like, well stocked? They haven't traded away any picks or any of that kind of stuff?
They've got 3 picks in the first 2 rounds, so they should be able to address a couple of their concerns anyway. But like anything, the draft is going to be determined by the opening sequence, because if for some unbelievable reason the Bengals take someone other than Burrow, like, the dominoes will fall accordingly and things will just start flying. And as we see in every draft, speaking of wide receivers, for example, once the first wide receiver goes, they all start to go, because people start panicking. And as Cian so acutely sort of framed CeeDee Lamb, but he's one of many in this draft. So I think people will be flush with options if they're looking for a wide receiver.
Yeah, Kim, we should briefly talk about this, because a lot of people will be tuning in for the first time going, okay, I'm going to pay attention finally to draft talk, because it is next Thursday. There are about 12 receivers that people believe will be capable of playing in the NFL next season as rookies, and some of them will be capable of being superstars in their first season. And most of that group of the first 12 receivers, people will believe could be either first-day starters or certainly could play 10 to 12 games and contribute in a meaningful way. So that's not generally the case. People are talking about this as a historic wide receiver class. Is that accurate?
Well, the first thing I'd like to say is if Patrick Queen gets to the Ravens, a lot of GMs should be fired because that's just unfair. That would be the perfect fit for them. He's an outstanding player. Yeah, this is a wide receiver heavy class, and it's interesting. Like we talked at the start here about how much of the draft I've covered and how deep I've gone. I've gone very deep on the wide receivers, and a lot of people talk about the depth of this draft and talk, well, oh, we can get a receiver in the second or third or fourth round. I don't think that's the way this draft is. I think most of them are going to be gone in the top 50 because that's the kind of talent that you've got there. So if you start at the very top, for me, CeeDee Lamb is a superstar. I think he's going to go and step into the NFL and make whatever team he lands on much better straight away. His ability to create after the catch, his precise route running, he's going to be a star. Henry Ruggs is a speedster from Alabama who's a little bit more reliant on his fit. There's talk of him going to the 49ers actually at 13, which is a perfect fit there because Kyle Shanahan has forever loved the fast wide receiver, and that's the pick I believe that's the pick they traded. Yeah, it is the pick they traded from the Colts for DeForest Buckner, which is kind of an interesting detail because the Colts desperately need wide receivers as well, which is why I criticized that trade at the time because they might think they're going to get another draft or another receiver in the second round, but I don't think by that stage when they come on the second round, all the best receivers will be gone. Jerry Jeudy will be gone, Henry Ruggs will be gone, CeeDee Lamb will be gone, I think Mims will be gone. You've got Justin Jefferson there, who the Eagles have been tied to constantly. And normally, when the Eagles get tied to a player, it happens. They don't hide it very often, as far as I can tell. Yeah, this is an incredible wide receiver class. But I also there's a danger of thinking this wide receiver class has too many superstars. I think CeeDee Lamb is a superstar. I think Henry Ruggs has the ability to beat Deshaun Jackson. I think after that, you're talking about guys who are very good receivers who aren't necessarily AJ Green or Odell Beckham, and that's kind of reflected in none of them are projected to go in the top 5 or the top 6 or the top 7 of the draft, but they're all projected to go within 7 to 32.
I've heard a Judy comparison with Odell Beckham, but who's your CeeDee Lamb comparison?
Sammy Watkins was who I thought of, but also Michael Crabtree. So I say Michael Crabtree and Sammy Watkins, and people think that's not a great receiver. But Sammy Watkins is a superstar talent. He's never reached that level. He's had injuries to deal with. He's played in situations where he hasn't got enough of the ball. In Buffalo, he never really got enough opportunities. In Los Angeles, he was used as a vertical threat, similar to Brandon Cook. So that limited how much work he did. In Kansas City, he's obviously been extremely good, but there's only one ball between Travis Kelce, Tyreek Hill, and everyone else on that offense. So the thing about he has that Sammy Watkins has is that fluid explosiveness, that comfort moving around the field, that ability to make defenders miss, but a more slender frame, but with the strength to still break tackles. Where Michael Crabtree comes into it is you have his very precise route running that Watkins didn't have coming out. Michael Crabtree was incredibly good at setting himself up to run after the catch when he caught the ball, which sounds like a very minute detail, but it's a very big detail because if you're setting yourself up to catch the ball facing your quarterback and you're already turning around or you're already moving to space to avoid a hit, it's hugely valuable. Crabtree did all that and was a very, very good receiver until he got a significant injury, but he was never hugely explosive. So when you take that element of Crabtree's game and put it on a guy with Sammy Watkins' level of explosiveness, you're going to have an incredibly difficult receiver to cover and an incredibly difficult receiver to stop when he's being tackled in the open field.
And Ruggs is the other one. I think I've heard him being linked actually with the Raiders. Now, if Ruggs goes to the Raiders, then apparently that doesn't bode very well for Derek Carr. Is that? Am I getting those dominoes correct?
I think the fear for the Raiders will be they picked a guy called Darius Hayward-Bay more than 10 years ago, and he was just a speedster as well. But that's not really the case. Ruggs is very, very fast receiver, but he's also shown some ability to run routes. These are very young players. They're incomplete prospects. They're incomplete players. He can develop a wider route tree. He can develop into more of a complete player. Realistically, the Raiders' fit is much better with CeeDee Lamb because Lamb is the guy who'll catch the ball underneath and make everyone miss, and Derek Carr threw the ball short of the first down line, 23rd most often in the league last year, which means he's always throwing short passes and relying on his receivers to run after the catch. So you have those two elements together. If you put Henry Ruggs in there, you're getting a guy who doesn't really work well after the catch, doesn't run great routes underneath, but stretches the field vertically. Tyrell Williams already does that, so I'm not sure if it's a short-term addition, it would be a good one. But that comes back to the mindset of these teams, which is another element of the draft. What way are you thinking? Are you trying to think long-term to rebuild? Are you trying to get the best prospects who, no matter the position, no matter your position need right now, or are you trying to fill specific holes so you can be a better team in 2020? The Raiders, I would suspect, are trying to be better in 2020. I don't think Henry Ruggs makes that much sense for them. If they do want a receiver who's not CeeDee Lamb, it would more likely be Jerry Jeudy.
Okay, one thing to bear in mind here is that every scenario is on the table where games are played behind closed doors. Next year, no games get played as well. So there's a possibility that the draft order for this year is the same as the draft order for next year. And we never actually get to see these players play as rookies until 12 months' time. So, are GMs thinking like that? Are some of them going to take the risk and go, I'm going to plug certain holes in my team, I'm going to have 12 months really to build on it? Or does everybody assume that there will be some kind of season at some point, even if it was, say, next January, February, March?
It depends on your job security, right? Because some teams there, like one of the interesting elements right now being talked about is if the Detroit Lions take a quarterback. And I think if you are Matt Patricia and your biggest problem right now is and you fear your job security and you think you might get fired if we have a season this year and you have a bad year, you take Tua Tagovailoa if he's there, because that means you can do that transition that the Kansas City Chiefs did with Alex Smith to Patrick Mahomes, and you get an extra year, and it doesn't really matter if you don't make the playoffs this year. Whereas other teams are building for the long term and they know already. So I don't think whether we have a season or not matters or well, it matters obviously. I don't know if it impacts the thought process that much. Most NFL people and most NFL coaches are kind of, we compete every day. We do no matter what. Like look at Tony Ferguson in the UFC right now. He was supposed to have a fight this weekend, and instead it was called off, obviously. And he's actually making weight today just because he wants to prove he's a psychopath and prove his brand. But like that's the kind of way the NFL GMs are. They're going to do, and they're going to act as if everything is normal, as if everything's going to work the way it is, unless it comes down to like a job security issue or a thought process where we're going to do what's best for my long-term option here and my long-term job security. One of the most obvious examples, one of the examples that's holding fruition this year is the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, who brought in Bruce Arians and talked up Jameis Winston all that time, and the GM there got an extension despite being awful for the first 3 or 4 years of his deal, and now he got Tom Brady, so he was just holding on long enough to get Tom Brady, and now he's obviously his job is safe.
And look, if they win a Super Bowl with Tom Brady, everybody there has a job for life. Ronan, what are you most looking forward to for this very strange draft, which was supposed to be glitz and glamour and boats across lakes indoors in Vegas, and now all of a sudden it's in the dank dungeon that is the commissioner's basement? So I'm looking forward to seeing.
Much like you, Ger, I just can't wait to see what Roger Goodell's living room is like. And Rich Eisen making his return to ESPN. Apparently it's going to be a dual cast with the NFL Network, so there's a few little dynamics going on there. But I think the teams who want to make some brave decisions in this draft and maybe not pander to the fans as they would have done in Nashville last year at that hoop and hollering sort of ceremony, I think like the Jets, for example, who are in dire need of one of those star-studded wide receivers, but they actually need to bulk up their interior, and they might take this opportunity to maybe go for that this year. And if there were Jets fans in attendance, they'd probably be booing them out of the building, but I think that might give them a chance to maybe be a bit more sensible in their selections, because as much as I love Brashad Perryman and they've managed to nab him, I think they're in dire need of a wide receiver.
Yeah, it's making that decision. It's that trade-off of where do you actually draft the wide receiver when your offensive line is no good, or when you have a gaping hole in your offensive line. A lot of people, their eyes glaze over when we start talking about offensive and defensive lines, Cian, but apparently there's 5 good offensive linemen in this draft, and I remember being very bored when the San Francisco 49ers picked McGlinchey, where they picked him a couple of years back. I was like, oh, this is very boring. Turns out he's quite a good player, not a great player at the moment. Might turn into a great player if they move him over to left tackle, who knows. But like, there's a strong chance the 49ers bore the pants off everybody and pick an offensive lineman at 13 as a replacement for Joe Staley. That's not very exciting. I want wide receivers. I want Tua to fall to 13 and suddenly Kyle Shannon to go, ooh, shiny new, but he's not going to do it. And should we talk about the offensive and defensive line, or is the world too grim at the moment for us to spend any time on that?
Well, we should do that, or we should talk about what Owen Sheehan's going to do this year, because he has to get drunk at home now and at the draft, which is unusual for him. The offensive linemen in this class are really interesting in the sense that you've got 2 very different types at the top. Tristan Wirfs is a right tackle who's kind of established as a quality player already coming into the league, but he's not being talked about as a left tackle because he played right tackle in college. But he played right tackle in college because they had a very good left tackle already. So it's a big kind of story to follow there. It's a spiel to follow. So he's kind of the safe pick. And then Mekhi Becton is a very, very talented athletic player who could be Tyron Smith or he could be Greg Robinson. So that's the big risk who's going to go in the top 10 or top 15. You have a couple of guys, Jedrick Willis, Andrew Thomas. You have guys who are going to make make big impacts, but probably guys you won't really talk about that much over the course of their careers. An offensive line is it's probably unlike most things in most sports because one, they never touch the ball as offensive players, which is a weird thing in itself. But two, they are hugely important, but they're not usually impactful individually. So it's not just that you're drafting someone that no one's going to see touch the ball. It's that if you draft one great offensive lineman and you put him on your already bad offensive line, you're not going to see any actual impact. Whereas if you have a couple of guys already who are pretty good and you've got one massive hole and you take a great offensive lineman and put him in that, suddenly your offense becomes really, really good, really, really much better than it was. And your quarterback suddenly looks really good, and your wide receivers are making big plays because they're getting more time, and your running backs running consistently. And you think all these players have just gotten much better. But the reality is, what's happened is you've made your offensive line better, and your offensive line is more important than any other unit in the league. Well, actually, it's a bit misleading because the reality of it is there's 5 players in that group. So obviously, having 5 players, that's almost half of your offense.
Yeah.
So that's the most important part of your offense after the quarterback. I would say it's equally as important as the quarterback. A great offensive line can make an average quarterback look great. An awful offensive line can make a great quarterback look bad. So it's a really important aspect of the game. It's a really important aspect of structuring a team. But because you're making one draft pick, you can't change the direction of your offensive line with one choice. The Atlanta Falcons last year actually took Caleb McGarry at right tackle and name escapes, Christopher Lindstrom, I think it was, at right guard, both in the first round last year in the hopes of doing exactly that, turning their offensive line around in one single year. And unfortunately, McGarry got sick, actually. It wasn't even an injury. He had some illness that was wrong with him before the start of last season, which disrupted all of that. So they tried to get 2 offensive linemen and be exciting and kind of change the whole shape, whole identity of their offense in a single offseason, and they didn't manage to do it. Maybe it'll come up trumps them next year. Actually, the Bengals took their left tackle last year. Same thing happened to him. Didn't play as a rookie, and now they're in a good position here where they have this left tackle coming in who's going to start, and they have Joe Burrow coming in at the same time. The left tackle obviously isn't a rookie, but they'll be able to grow together as this foundation of that offense. So they can be exciting. Like if you watch Tyron Smith run 60 yards downfield, beating people up all along the way, it's a very exciting thing to see. But generally, it's understandable why you wouldn't get excited.
He's the guy who's like 350 pounds and runs in under 5-second 40. Is he the guy that we're talking about?
He is the guy who is like, it's like John Lomo. He's like, he's what you said, but he's got a 6-pack.
Right. Two quick things. The boring offensive line, the analogy that I always think of is when Ireland played England at Twickenham, Mike Ross went off injured. Tom Court shifted. He's not even a tight head, but he came on a tight head, and Ireland's scrum went back the whole day, and we got absolutely blitzed, and we got completely annihilated. So if your offensive line is full of Tom Court's players in the wrong position, then you're completely screwed. And that's why if you are picking in the top 15, picking an offensive lineman probably isn't the worst thing of all time. And I just looked it up. Aaron Donald was picked 13, actually, as a defensive lineman in the draft, whenever that was. When would that have been? 2014. So
that's a great draft as far as I remember too.
Well, obviously everybody who didn't pick him before that was picking the wrong player because he's been the best player in the NFL since.
If you look at that list, there's some talented players there ahead of him. Like Aaron Donald, everyone loved Aaron Donald, but Aaron Donald, this is another aspect of the draft actually. Aaron Donald came out as not meeting thresholds for some players or for some teams. So some teams have.
I'm gonna stop you right there. I'm gonna tell you that number 1 that year was Jadeveon Clowney, number 2 was Greg Robinson, number 3 was Blake Bortles, and number 4 was Sammy Watkins. So a lot of teams should have picked Aaron Donald.
Who's next?
Okay, so Khalil Mack, I would still pick just ahead. After that, Jake Matthews, Mike Evans, Justin Gilbert, Anthony Barr, Eric Ebron from the Detroit Lions. Come on down, Eric Ebron. Who would you rather have?
Funnily enough, actually, the Lions that year took Eric Ebron because he was a big tight end and needed a big receiver, and that was their reason for not taking Odell Beckham. So that's the kind of dumb decisions you get when you get to the draft. But in that class, Mike Evans there was really good.
Yeah, there's a few
people really good. Sammy Watkins is really good. Never kind of realised it. A couple of guys like that. Jadeveon Clowney similar. But yeah, Aaron Donald coming out, everyone knew how good he was, but a lot of teams wouldn't have even had him on their board because a lot of teams have thresholds where they need a defensive lineman to be a specific height, have a specific arm length, and have a specific weight, or they won't put them in the NFL because they will say you won't be able to hold up against these monsters that already exist here. That's why you find guys who dominate the college game who don't actually ever turn into anything. The first guy I found out this about was Freddie Behrens. I think it was probably 12 years ago. I watched a bowl game where he caught 16 passes or something like that for 300 yards, and no one could cover him. And I was so confused because he went undrafted. no one picked him. And because at the time I didn't understand that you could be a player who dominates in college, who just doesn't fit in the NFL and doesn't have the required athleticism in the NFL to be the right player. And that's why there's also this big risk with players. Like I was a huge Mason Rudolph fan, and he just didn't have that threshold level of arm strength to be effective in the NFL. Yeah. And now it's been made obvious to me that Mason Rudolph isn't a good NFL quarterback.
Yeah, okay. Look, let's move on, because we could end up previewing this the whole way through. We'll definitely talk about it again next week in a bit more detail in advance. And then obviously next Friday we'll know the first round picks. Unfortunately, they haven't changed the time. They're still going to put this on late night American time, which is a bit stupid when everybody's at home all day anyway, and they could have saved us all from staying up till 3 o'clock in the morning to find out who the 13th pick in the 2020. I mean, how sad is our lives, JP? That's what I'm asking. How sad is our lives? That this is actually the most exciting thing we have to look forward to for the next week is who's getting picked 13th in the 2020 draft. And I guess 31st in our case as well, as 49ers fans. But
no, it's really sad if you start watching it down to the 7th round. Then you're in trouble.
Well, at least there was good pomp and circumstance, and there was like a dolphin picking those picks, and you know they would have characters on. This year, it's like just going to be the blandest thing that you've ever seen. There was some suggestion that they might even have extended it so that a load more undrafted free agents would get in. But anyway, they didn't. We did promise everybody that we would talk about Super Bowl 49, which was the Patriots against the defending champions Seahawks. And we've rewatched this week. It finishes, everybody probably remembers that from the half-yard line with 2 plays left to go and was it 35 seconds left on the clock, that instead of giving the ball to Marshawn Lynch, the Seahawks decided that Russell Wilson was going to be the one who gets the glory by throwing the ball to Tyler Lockett on the goal line, and Lockett would fall over, break the plane, score the touchdown. The game would have been over, the Patriots would have been defeated, and Russell Wilson would have been the hero of the hour instead of Marshawn Lynch, who we all know if they'd given the ball to Marshawn Lynch, he would have just jumped over the offensive line, because that's what he does. And if he didn't do it the first time, he would have done it the second time, and the Seahawks would have gone back-to-back and been a dynasty, essentially. But it didn't happen. Malcolm Butler stepped in because there were several tells, it turns out, on the play, and the Patriots knew this was coming. When you were watching this back, Cian, what did you notice?
The play itself or the game?
The game. What struck you? So you watched it last night. What struck you?
Well, this game was fascinating because the way the layers of it are and the way there's such knock-on effects from all little details. If you want to kind of start from that play and work backwards, Malcolm Butler is the one who makes the interception. He makes the interception by jumping a slant route to Ricardo Lockett that they always ran out of a specific formation. There's actual videotape of Malcolm Butler jumping this exact same play in practice leading up to the game because they had scouted the Seahawks and what they like to do in red zone. And Butler knew what was coming, so Ricardo Lockett was expecting a wide open play off of a pick with a player in front of him, and Butler jumped in front of him to pick the ball off. It wasn't really Russell Wilson's fault. It was the play call and the play design, the Patriots defender reading it and running into it. Marshawn Lynch, just before that, had gained 4 yards on a run from the 5-yard line. The Seahawks still had a timeout, so they could have run the ball again and then tried to run the ball again. Pete Carroll's explanation was if you throw on that down, you have 2 options if the ball goes incomplete on the next down, which makes sense. So it's hard to blame him that much, but the interesting element of that play is the only reason Malcolm Butler is on the field at that point is Chris Matthews, who did nothing after this game, did nothing before this game, became a superstar. He had I think over 147 yards, something insane.
So Chris Matthews is working in a Foot Locker. That's the same guy?
Yeah, so he got a call to go to Seattle and had to actually get time off work to go and work out and try and get on the team. So he's this 6'5", really athletic receiver who was in this specific game played like Randy Moss. He was jumping and catching everything. He caught a touchdown just before the start or the end of the second quarter. He caught their first big play of the game early in the second quarter as well. He caught another big play at the start of the third quarter. And the reason this was happening was the Patriots had Darrelle Revis, they had Brandon Browner, a former Seahawk, they had Logan Ryan. So what Bill Belichick often does is he has specific players take on specific receivers in terms of coverage. So Darrelle Revis played Doug Baldwin throughout the whole game. Doug Baldwin was the Seahawks' best receiver. Jeremy Kearse was taken by Brandon Browner for much of the game, as far as I remember. It was Golden Tate on the team. Whichever the third receiver was taken by Logan Ryan, which was another matchup that made sense. But all that happened was Chris Matthews was left when he was on the field to go against Kyle Arrington. So Chris Matthews is 6'5". Kyle Arrington is like 5'9". So it was a major mismatch where they could constantly throw the ball up and let Matthews go and get it. So the knock-on effect of this was, later in the game, Kyle Arrington had been beaten so much that Malcolm Butler was getting more of an opportunity. So they're playing with 3 point, or they have a 3-point lead at this point, a 4-point lead at this point, and the Patriots have all their defensive backs on the field expecting pass, even when they get into the red zone. Butler is now on the field because of how well Chris Matthews had carried the Seahawks offense through the game. They needed someone else to compete against him. And actually, interesting enough, Malcolm Butler became a failure after, well, not a failure, he's still starting for the Titans. He's not anywhere close to being, he became rich. He's not anywhere close to the superstar he was talked up to be at this point. But in this specific game, he also made a great play beforehand on the play immediately preceding the final play, or 2 plays before that, where Jeremy Curse caught the ball off of a bat. Out of a tip in the air, and he actually made a great play on that play.
You should explain this. You should explain this, because this would be the helmet catch. This would be as famous as any other play in NFL history if the Seahawks had actually just punched the ball into the end zone the way they were supposed to do. So it's a long, long throw from Russell Wilson where the ball is in the air for absolutely ages. Whoever the DB marking, it is Curse, is it? Actually gets up, makes a play on the ball. Curse falls. The ball bounces off his knee, bobbles again in the air, and then Curse catches it and gets up.
Yeah,
and is
like literally like
5 yards from the end zone.
It's not a pass thrown to a receiver. It's like when you throw the ball in at the start of a Gaelic football match. The ball is just up between the two of them. And Malcolm Butler makes a great play because he has the benefit of being able to go with one hand. He's just trying to knock the ball away, whereas Curse needs to reach up with two and try and actually control it. And they both hit the ball at the same time, so it bounces off each other. They both fall to the ground. Curse is on the ground, and the ball bounces off his leg, I think, initially. Then he plucks it away with one hand. Yeah, he plucks it away with one hand, and the official is right there. And funnily enough, an official actually got it right for once. Normally this kind of thing they get wrong, but no one could believe it. Like Al Michaels said, "Oh, this ball falls incomplete," and then he's like, "Wait!" He's all surprised, all energetic, and suddenly the Seahawks are on the precipice of scoring. Yeah,
a sensational play, and it looks like their name is on the trophy. It has all the hallmarks of being one of those things where for the rest of time it gets played and played and played. No one remembers that play now. I mean, obviously everybody involved in it doesn't, and we're just talking about it now. Ronan, what struck you rewatching this?
Yeah, well, it was the story of 2 interceptions, Ger, and speaking of the one at the end, like the 2 things you're expecting when the ball's on the 1 yard line, either a repeat of when the Patriots let Ahmad Bradshaw score for the Giants to give Tom Brady a chance to go back up and win the game in a previous Super Bowl. And then the other thing, take the time out and save yourself some time, but he didn't either. He let the Seahawks beat themselves almost, and that's exactly what happened. It was a very brave call. Like, that's history is written by the victors, and I wonder, did Belichick himself sort of panic? Is he getting too much credit for that? I'm not sure. But the other interception in this game, which is very pivotal in retrospect, Jeremy Lane picks off Tom Brady early on, and Jeremy Lane in this Legion of Boom is sort of like a Paul Giamatti Best Supporting Actor sort of character, not one of the big names like Richard Sherman or Brown or Earl Thomas, who was in his pomp. But Jeremy Lane, when the nickel defense was there, he was the guy who came on and looked after the middle of the field, and he was brilliant in the little time he got in this game. But when he got the pick, rather than grounding the ball in the end zone, he tried to return it, got nailed going over the touchline, and was knocked out of the game. And poor old Terrell Simon comes in and gets absolutely lit up by Bill Belichick. Like, he puts basically 2 touchdowns. I think it's Brandon LaFell's touchdown and Julian Edelman's touchdown both come off Simon, who was basically a deer in the headlights. So you talk about domino effect. If Jeremy Lane stays in this game for the entirety, I think the Seahawks probably would have closed it out.
So he's injured in that play. It definitely looked like one of the other cornerbacks ended up getting a concussion whenever Brandon LaFell scores his touchdown, because
Harold Simon, yeah,
they smack into each other and you can just kind of see him. I don't know. Did he play on after that?
He did, but he also was the one who gave up the game-winning touchdown that Ronan just mentioned. That's actually kind of a fascinating detail of this Seahawks team, because they were built with I just talked about thresholds in the draft. They were built on the idea of having long, tall cornerbacks. Richard Sherman, huge. Brandon Browner, huge. Byron Maxwell, very tall, very long, very famous for knocking the ball out with his arms all the time. And Terrell Simon was the same breed, same type of player, which is a major problem when you're going against Danny Amendola and Julian Edelman. At the start of the game, Danny Amendola made Richard Sherman miss in space on a quick short throw underneath. He did the same thing again to, I believe it was Simon later in the game for another big play. When you have guys who are shorter, who can move and turn very quickly in space, it was the worst thing for the Seahawks defense. The Seahawks had, like, Pete Carroll built the team up from the ground by doing the opposite of what pretty much everyone else did, where he got smaller, faster defensive linemen, smaller, faster linebackers, and bigger defensive backs, which worked against most teams because they could keep up and they had special players. But against the Patriots, they needed Jeremy Lane to get injured, because once Jeremy Lane went off the field, it had to be Terrell Simon working against these guys, and he couldn't turn the way Jeremy Lane could. And funnily enough, like, Tom Brady is one of these controversial figures who, well, not controversial, but if you ever criticize him, you kind of get put in one corner, and if you praise him way too much. In this specific game, the Patriots had Brady threw 2 awful interceptions. And on the first interception, Jeremy Lane got injured, and that led to them being able to move the ball in the second half and move the ball after that injury specifically, because they very specifically targeted Terrell Simon, like Ronan said. In the second interception, Cliff Avril got injured. So he came off the field and didn't come back on at all. So then the pass rush suddenly disappeared. So in the second quarter, in the second half, this isn't like the Falcons Super Bowl where the defense just got tired. On this Super Bowl, where that was by design, the Patriots wore them out. So you can't really say that's a luck. That was well done by the Patriots. In this game, they had Cam Chancellor coming in hurt. They had Cliff Avril go off injured. They had Jeremy Lane go off injured. Julian Edelman should have gone to a concussion protocol late in the fourth quarter when he took a massive hit converting a 3rd and 14. He stayed on the field. So there was a lot of controversy in this game. And Brady, the story of it could have been completely different if those injuries didn't happen, because they were really struggling with the matchups initially.
Just a reminder, of course, you can be part of our OTB American Football Hub, where you'll get the very latest news around all things gridiron, including the Snap podcast and the latest news and reports from the Irish American Football League when it restarts. Just head over to offtheball.com/Club Gridiron to sign up. Ronan, what else kind of struck you? What was stuff that you kind of look back and go, oh yeah, I remember that?
Well, Chris Matthews, as Cian mentioned, like, he ended up at the Ravens. It was more of like a Kiko Makeda sort of performance, where I think Andy Gray said a star is born, and I think people probably were thinking something similar about this guy, because he seemed to have all the assets to be a top receiver, but as things turned out, that was his highlight reel moment, and he probably would have won MVP if Marshawn Lynch had to just run that ball in towards the end. I just love the dynamics of this whole game were so interesting. Like, just from an outside looking in, the Patriots versus the Seahawks. The Seahawks came out of nowhere on the brink of a dynasty, and you compare it to Boston, where they're flush with all these different franchises across all sports. And the Seahawks, the Sonics were gone. In 2008, the Seahawks were almost gone from Seattle. I think there was a referendum on whether to build a new stadium. Paul Allen, who co-founded Microsoft, basically said, we should get 300 million together and try and build a new stadium and really kick this on. And it was 51% to 49%. So they were this close to going to California. And from there, Seahawks built this unbelievable thing. And I still think, even though they didn't get to win this Super Bowl, they're still remembered as a great team, almost like that Armagh team in 2002, where they probably should have won multiple championships, but they're still remembered, I think, as a defining point in the game. They almost revolutionised how defenses played, and I just love that Seahawks team, the fact that they never really changed their defensive coverage. They played 3 deep and just begged you to beat them. They just backed themselves so much that they were so good. And the story of the secondary was never really a strength of the Patriots until recent years, and they took Darrell Revis in, which was a very un-Belichick-like move. I'm open to correction on that, but it seemed a bit strange that he paid Darrell Revis for 1 season, and they're not each other's kind of person, but they sort of had this unspoken agreement that, right, let's try and get a ring this year and then I'm out of here. So he went back to the Jets ultimately after that. It was kind of like what Deion Sanders went to the 49ers, and he wasn't the most popular person in that locker room, but he got them a chip, and the rest is history. So Richard Sherman, obviously, as well. I think he was injured going into this game, and he kind of dipped a little bit from this point on. He had such a resurgence last season, obviously, but Richard Sherman, who was a household name in America at this point after his interview with Aaron Matthews the previous season. So, do you remember the first game of that season where, I think it was the first game anyway, where Aaron Rodgers just did not throw to that side of the field for the entire game? And you've seen in recent years, speaking of Darrell Revis, actually in the last few weeks, Darrell Revis was kind of giving Sherman some stick because he doesn't travel. He kind of stays on his side. And even in this game, I think I counted once or twice maybe that Brady targeted Sherman. So he had this sort of charisma almost, but he had this larger-than-life personality that, like, it almost outstripped his play. As talented as a player as he was, I think his reputation was almost as big.
Well, that was definitely his peak. These couple of seasons are his absolute peak, where he was sensational, and you know, you didn't try his ass with a sorry receiver like Crabtree, despite what Cian was saying earlier on with his Crabtree love. Why don't you marry Crabtree, Cian? That was my overarching thought when you were saying that. Can
we just note what Ronan said there about not throwing the Sherman side of the field, because that season in the game Ronan talked about, they just put Devontae Adams out there. And this is when Devontae Adams was the Packers' 4th or 5th option. They just put him out there and left him there and didn't bother. They worked with Jordy Nelson on the other side of the field. And Rodgers got criticised for it, but it made so much sense. And then when they met in the playoffs, as far as I remember, they opened that game with a throw down the right sideline to test Sherman. And he either nearly intercepted it or he did intercept it. And after that, they went straight back to not throwing at him again. And that's the level he was at, because this is during the years when I used to chart cornerbacks, and it was incredible watching Richard Sherman and Darrelle Revis play, and then going and watching the other cornerback and realizing just how big the gap was. Revis used to follow everyone around the field, so his success rate was about 65 to 70%. But he was being put in positions where there was no help. Everyone else went and worked on did whatever else. Revis took the best receiver that you had and looked after him all by himself, and that's impossible. No one else has done that. Like, you've got probably the best cornerback to ever play in this game for the Patriots, and Richard Sherman is going to be in the top 5 somewhere. He's going to be one of the greatest ever. And it's in a league right now where we haven't had a superstar cornerback outside of these two for probably 20 years, for probably at least 15 years. Maybe since Champ Bailey's, Champ Bailey was 2008, 2009, 2010. So maybe 12 years, 11 years. So it's a really fascinating matchup in terms of you have two quarterbacks who play very differently on the field, but were also completely different personalities off the field. And this Super Bowl was the point where the Seahawks had been built up from the bottom. They were previously beloved when they were going against Peyton Manning, and they were the underdog, and they were the team that shocked the greatest offense ever and shut them down and became everyone's favorites. And then Richard Sherman became more of a focus, and he became more of a hated figure, and the team as a whole became this hated figure. At this point, it was kind of viewed more as two evil empires going against each other, rather than what normally happens is everyone wants the Patriots to lose except for Patriots fans.
Just very briefly, the NFC Championship game, and I don't want to linger too long on this, but it was absolutely wild. I think people have probably forgotten about this. I had completely forgotten about it until I was reading about it. Essentially, the Packers are absolutely killing the Seahawks for the majority of the game until about 5 minutes left, and maybe even a little bit less. Russell Wilson gets the ball, marches down the field, scores a touchdown. Then they recover an onside kick. And I think there's still time for 2 more field goals after that. The game goes into overtime. Russell Wilson gets the ball, drives the field, 80 yards, touchdown, game over. And that might have been the very end, it turns out, of the Packers' chance to become a dynasty, for us to think of Aaron Rodgers as one of the greatest quarterbacks of all time. Because there will always be you did it once, Aaron. You needed to do it more than that if you were going to be considered Tom Brady's peer or in the same conversation as Joe Montana. And I'm sure...
And the biggest takeaway from that game was Mike McCarthy not going for it on 4th and short and 3rd and short. And that ultimately led the Seahawks back into the game. And Mike McCarthy eventually got gotten rid of in Green Bay. And now the Packers, or the Cowboys, have just hired Mike McCarthy to replace Jason Garrett for making the exact same mistakes that Mike McCarthy made all the way through his career.
It's almost like they didn't watch the tape of this game. But I did want to just wrap up by talking about how this was essentially the breakup of the Legion of Boom. You know, this ends ultimately with their best player, one of the greatest safeties of all time, being stretchered off, having broken his leg and flipping the bird to the sideline. And the genesis of it happens this year, where Pete Carroll protects his quarterback, who apparently at this stage is quite a shy and retiring, gentle flower, while that's not what the Legion of Boom and the rest of the defensive guys were like. Apparently Sherman picks off Russell Wilson in a training match and goes to him and starts giving him shit, and Carroll intervenes. So was it Seth Wickersham wrote this piece as well?
I believe so, yeah.
So the details in that piece are...
No, sorry, that wasn't. It's Robert Klemko of Sports Illustrated.
Okay, so it was Klemko's piece. And you know, obviously everybody denied everything that was in it, but like not to the point where they're suing Klemko and there's no apologies issued. So we're accepting a variation of this as reality. Russell Wilson was sensational in the second half of this game, and sensational after the last few minutes of the first half, where the game was getting away from them and they let him do stuff. And it seems like Pete Carroll overprotected him to a point, and probably still is overprotecting him a bit.
I think to understand this team, you have to go back to how this team was built. So everyone knows Richard Sherman. He's the most famous aspect of the most famous player on the team, basically. He was a 5th-round pick. He was a cornerback at Stanford who couldn't get on the field and was asked to play wide receiver. Jim Harbaugh basically told him he'd never be anything. He's just this guy. And he came out of college as a random player that no one really cared about. And he immediately established himself as a really good cornerback. And he developed into a superstar cornerback and then became potentially one of the greatest cornerbacks ever. And that's the mindset that this team was built with. When Pete Carroll took over, he had Matt Hasselbeck and Marshawn Lynch was there. But outside of that, it was pretty much a complete rebuild job. And he made, I think, 720 transactions in his first year. Whatever the normal number of transactions is, Pete Carroll doubled it. Because he just wanted to give every single option a look. He wanted to try every single possible player. He had a guy like Chris Clemens come in, who came from anonymity and became this high-quality pass rusher. And the whole mantra of that team was, it does not matter who you are. You've got to beat out the next guy. You've got to always be competing, always be beating everyone out. And that's how they built this mentality. That's how they built great players. And this team wasn't built on high first-round picks. Earl Thomas was a high pick. Bobby Wagner was a 2nd-round pick. But most of the team was built out of lower-round picks who were guys weren't given everything they wanted in college, who were made to work and were built into this unit, this force. Michael Bennett and Cliff Averill were both overlooked free agents who were signed to the Seahawks relatively cheaply because they weren't getting the love from other teams, and that became the motivation factor for them. So you can go through all of this thing. And actually, when we talk about the final play of the Seahawks game, Pete Carroll choosing to throw the ball. He also went for it, throw the ball to Chris Matthews with 6 seconds left at the end of the second quarter. And this can all go right back to Russell Wilson's first season against Atlanta when they were at the end of the second quarter in that game, a game they ultimately lost, when they went for it from a situation where most teams would have kicked the field goal. And it was a mindset thing. It was an identity of the team. So when you have a look at Russell Wilson, he does not represent that identity at all. He's the guy who licks off cliches. He's very relaxed, doesn't really say anything. He mostly wants to talk about his religion and stuff like that. He doesn't really want to talk about how Michael Crabtree's a bum or how he's better than everyone else on the field and all this kind of stuff. So you've got this character at the helm of your team who is in complete contrast to what your team has been built on and how your team functions on a day-to-day. So the story of this game is, or the story of the story that we referenced is, in a practice during the 2014 season, this season that preceded the Super Bowl, Russell Wilson threw an interception in practice, and Richard Sherman basically went after him and started gloating him and started going, and the defense started celebrating, and the coaching staff kind of got them to stop, and they wanted him to not do that anymore because they wanted to keep Wilson's confidence up and keep his development up. And I can actually kind of understand both sides of this, because if you're a Seahawks defender and if you're a part of that team, you expect everyone to be treated the same way because that's the mantra of the way the team has been built and that's the way the success has come from. But the quarterback position is not really like that. It's not a linear development position. It's a nurturer position. It's a position where the quarterback's going to get an unfair amount of blame when things go wrong. He's got to be more cerebral than most on the field. He's got to learn, develop all the different understandings and coverages and different understandings of how to do specific things. It's such a complex position. I can understand why Pete Carroll was like, no, we need to look after this guy and let him develop the right way rather than putting him in straight competition with whoever we've got, and Tavares Jackson, whoever's there, which is a little bit of irony because that's how Wilson actually became the starter in the first place. They had a three-way competition between him, Tavares Jackson, and Matt Flynn. So this whole team is fascinating, and the 30 for 30 they do on it in 10 years or whatever it is going to be one of the best ever made.
Yeah, the lead and the boom themselves, and that's your way into the Russell Wilson story. Okay, we've got to go here. Anything else, Ronan, that you want to get off your chest about this game?
No, it's just such an interesting hearing you recount that dynamic, because it's kind of, as much as the on-field decisions are important, the off-field decisions are obviously so important, and the leadership aspect of it, you basically, because the teams are in their way so big, the rosters are huge, that you need sort of a totem that everything can be built around. And as Cian said, Russell Wilson was totally at odds with the ethic that seemed to define Seattle. And you fast forward just to this week, and you see what the Carolina Panthers have done by giving Christian McCaffrey all that money. As much as they want to keep him around, it's also the amount of money that they've given him, making him the highest paid running back ever. They're basically saying, this is our guy. And they did the exact same thing when Steve Smith was the czar. He was the man around town in Carolina, and Cam Newton came along, and it was almost like he wasn't the alpha in the dressing room. Steve Smith, as everyone knows, seen him on TV now, like he's a larger-than-life character. And they basically said, bye-bye, Steve Smith. They handed the keys to Cam Newton, and he took them to a Super Bowl. And now Cam Newton's time has come, and they've said, it's no longer your team, pal. We're giving it to Christian McCaffrey. And that was the case before Cam Newton was even let go. You could very clearly see in the last 18 months or so that it was a Christian McCaffrey first team. And I just find that whole dynamic so interesting. It's a unique thing to the NFL, I think, that you almost have to pick what route you're going to go, and what's on the field doesn't necessarily jive with what's going on in the locker room.
Ronan reminding us all on air that we'd gone 50 minutes of the snap this week without mentioning the biggest story of the entire week. Thank you for that, Ronan. It was an excellent point. We didn't even talk about Christian McCaffrey. I guess we got too excited by the Super Bowl 49 chat. Cian, last takeaway from Super Bowl 49 for you?
It's a weird thing of watching it back was how many players who just kind of disappeared. Like Malcolm Smith was in the other Super Bowl as the most random Super Bowl MVP ever. But when you look back on this game, like Chandler Jones was very quickly gotten out of New England after this. It was Vince Wilfork's final game as a Patriot. Rob Ninkovich retired 3 years ago, relatively young. Cliff Avrill's career was ended early because of a neck injury. Cam Chancellor's career was ended early because of a neck injury. Byron Maxwell got a huge contract, went to the Eagles, completely bombed straight away and wound up back in Seattle. Ricardo Lockett had one of the most devastating-looking injuries you've ever seen on a football field immediately after and during the following season. He's now at Harvard working as trying to help make the sport safer. I'm not sure how you do that. But just going through this game and looking at the players who kind of been and disappeared, and it's one of the most fascinating Super Bowls you'll ever come across, because it's also Pete Carroll, the underdog, building this team from nothing, going against a team that's been established, and the game itself then being very good. Just it had everything. Yeah, no, it surely did. Lads, great stuff this week. Thanks a million. We'll see you again next week for proper draft analysis and news. We'll have proper news where your team will have new players this time next week. That's another snap in the book for you. American football, all of it on Off the Ball, is brought to you in association with the Aer Lingus College Football Classic. Check out collegefootballireland.com for details, and you can sign up to our Club Gridiron, offtheball.com/Club Gridiron. See you next week.